All right, we are live. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Welcome to
Hello.
discussion 2. So this one, I think was a lot more of a setup section, to be perfectly honest. I don't know how you have felt, but I was like, oh, not a lot of action in this section.
Yeah, it did really feel like that. Like I'm reading it going, okay, something's going to happen. Something's going to happen. Just waiting for it, you know?
And in the last chapter we read, something finally happened.
Yeah. But even still, it was the past. It wasn't the present. He was just learning something about the past. So, and I'm so curious because, you know, we had that jump in 10 years in this section, and we don't really know what happened to him in those 10 years. And so I am just so curious, like, Naomi, you've read the book before. Do we ever find out what happened to him in those 10 years, or is that kind of just glossed over?
I think what's really interesting is that I think from like last section on, we don't see anything really from the Count's perspective anymore, or from Edmund's perspective anymore. So like,
really?
I don't know if you noticed that in this section where it's all from other people's perspectives of him.
Yes, I noticed
so, like, that. We're not seeing things from his perspective. And I don't remember if that changes much at the very end, but it's really going forward. That's how we see things. So we don't see his inner thoughts. We don't see how he perceives situations. And so
really,
it's really interesting to see how people perceive him and how that goes forward. So I don't think we see those 10 years because of that, unless I'm forgetting something that happens at the very end of the book.
That is very interesting.
That kind of changes it from, you know, a simple tale of revenge. You know, it changes it quite a bit. Because depending on how you see him, that will change how you feel about his actions.
Yeah. Oh, that's very interesting. There was a lot of interesting stuff. Like, even though there wasn't a ton of action in this section, there was a lot of really interesting stuff that happened. Like, for example, it took me longer than it should have to realize who Albert was. So you get this huge section of these two people, Albert and his friend in Rome, and I'm like, who are these people and what is going on? And then it took me way too long to realize that Albert was Mercedes' son. And it wasn't until like basically right before it was revealed where I was like, oh, this makes more sense now. Why we had to spend so much time with these two people.
Yes. That was a big moment when we realized that. It's like, oh, okay. I see what's happening.
Did you guys, I mean, you've read it before, Naomi, but Christy, did you pick up on that any earlier, or was it not until you kind of got to Albert's house?
Not until the house.
Okay.
Yeah, I had no idea.
Yeah, I think it does an interesting job of building that up, and you're like, why is the Count so friendly with this person? And then suddenly it's like, oh, there you go. That's why he's like building this relationship in a way. But it's very interesting.
And because it also made it seem like the Count was more interested in the other guy. I already forget the other guy's name. Yes. And that Albert was just along for the ride, right? So that was the other trick, because I was like, what's his connection with this other guy? But it was Albert all along that he was interested in.
I thought he was just there for comic relief.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fooled again.
Hi, Kelly. Yeah, it's an interesting perspective. And I think last time I read it, my cousin and I were discussing, and we realized that thing. So I just wanted to point that out in case anyone wants to notice that going forward.
It's very interesting.
Greenstick Cottage suspected it. So.
Oh, good for you.
Good catch. Yeah, it's definitely something interesting. I noticed a lot of coincidences in this section. Like, I think this book just drives a lot of coincidences, and I'm not mad about it. But I think, like, if you just think about that, right? You know, like the ship that saved Edmund the first time from when he was in the sea, like, there just happened to go to to the Monte Cristo island later on. And then he just happens to be on Monte Cristo when Franz is there. And then Franz happens to be Albert's best friend. It's like all of these coincidences, but it just happens to work out. And I'm okay with it.
Yeah. Well, and even in the later section here, I'm so bad with remembering people's names. The guy who works, or Bertuccio, I'm probably not saying his name right. He works for the Count. Bertuccio. And so we learned that whole part. So even the fact that he was hiding in the inn when that whole thing happened with Cardamoose. No, what was his name? See, I'm awful.
Yeah, the drunk guy from the first scene.
Yeah, trying to sell the jewel. The fact that he was there and witnessed all of that, I was like, what are the chances here? And how does he not recognize that the Abbe guy, the father that he confessed to, is the Count? How did he not recognize him?
Yeah.
It seems like only one person has recognized him.
And it's Franz, which is so strange. Like, he truly has seen his identity. Or unless it's someone else that you...
I was thinking of Mercedes.
Mercedes, too.
But actually, yes. You're right,
Mercedes
Franz.
has seen some suspicions, but I think Franz has been like, from the beginning, he's like, wait, that's
Very
Sinbad.
true.
Wait, that's the guy from the island. That's the same
Right.
person.
But he doesn't know the whole history, so he doesn't recognize him as the man who went to jail. He recognizes him as Sinbad. But yeah, I think Mercedes recognized his voice. The minute she heard him talking, she knew who it was.
It's very interesting. Yeah, the coincidences are laughable, but I am not someone who likes coincidences, so I'm like, normally I would be more annoyed, but I'm okay with this. It's been a while since I've reread it. So...
Yeah. There was one funny part about someone who should have recognized Dante but didn't. Because I marked that. I thought it was hilarious when it was kind of early on in our section, and he was talking to the inspector of prisons, and he said, I myself had occasion to see this man in 1816 or 1817, and we could only go into his dungeon with a file of soldiers. That man had made a deep impression on me. I shall never forget his countenance. The Englishman smiled imperceptibly. And you say, sir, he interposed, that the 2 dungeons? Like, he is speaking to the man who he says he will never forget his countenance.
That was great. And he's
brilliant. I also thought it was interesting because it was in that conversation we found out that the tunnel that they built between their 2 cells was 40 or 50 feet in length, because we never really knew before. We had a discussion last time about how long that may have been, and I was like, 40 or 50 feet? That's long to have to build that yourselves, to dig it out.
Yeah, and that was all the older guy. That was all the Abbe. Like, that was, like, he stumbled on Edmund. He did not get Edmund's help in that.
No, I know. Amazing.
Yeah, they're probably like, oh, Edmund did that. And it's like, actually, that would be the old guy. Tony has a retelling, in case any of us are interested. So, Stars My Tennis Balls by Stephen Fry, or The Revenge.
Is a modern retelling of The Count of Monte Cristo. That's fascinating.
Interesting.
Never heard of that. That's very interesting.
Yeah. Did anyone notice how often the Count is referred to as, like, almost undead?
Yes. Yes, he is so that there's again reference to his rising from the grave.
He's like a vampire, or he's cold.
Yes.
I didn't make that connection though until you said that.
Yeah,
I was tapping it every time. I was like, oh, there's another one. He looks as if he's a ghost or whatever it was.
Oh, that's funny. I did notice they keep talking about how pale he is, and I thought that was so interesting because we're now like more than 10 years since he's escaped. He should have gained his color back, but the fact that he's still pale just like goes with exactly what you're saying, Naomi, that he like appears undead or is a vampire or something. I don't know. That's very interesting.
He doesn't eat.
What's
just
true
eats
too?
hashish. That's it. He just lives on hashish. That startled me when that popped up. It's like, what am I reading here?
Yep. Oh,
Yes.
the drug use, it was like, okay, we're in this scene now.
Yeah.
Oh.
I have a very funny story actually about that hashish part in the book because Franz is Albert's friend, right? So when Franz is having his dinner in the cave or whatever with Dante on the island, also that was weird. Like, why make this cave so fancy and like, why doesn't he's got money, why doesn't he just build a house for himself on the island? But anyways, when they were in the middle of that dinner and they're having this conversation, they're talking about whatever they're talking about, but he says, so they keep referring to him as the Englishman. He said, oh no, hang on one second, I went to the wrong tab.
Oh yeah, I'm interested to hear what else you guys are tabbing.
Kelly mentioned how amazing a shower and a shave can be.
Yeah, exactly.
And a haircut. His hair was so long.
Isn't that classic of books of this time period, though? And even in Shakespeare, where like someone just has to do like one minor thing to them as a disguise and nobody recognizes them anymore.
I remember seeing a meme where it was like in every Shakespeare play, it's like one thing and then the other person puts on a hat. It's like when they're like, I don't know you. That's Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I found it. So they're having their discussion. He's given them the hashish. They're talking about the hashish, and he says, tell me, the first time you tasted oysters, tea, porter, truffles, and sundry other dainties which you now adore, did you like them? Could you comprehend how the Romans stuffed their pheasants with asafoetida? I don't know what that is. And the Chinese eat swallows' nests. I marked that because I know exactly what he's talking about. Swallow's nests. There's an Asian grocery store in our city that used to have cooking lessons, and Aaron and I went a few times, and it was great. It was fantastic. And then we would also just do some shopping while we were there. And Aaron found this canned drink, and it was called Bird's Nest Drink. And Aaron was fascinated. He was like, what is a bird's nest drink? So we asked the lady who owned the store, and she was like, oh, that stuff's great. I use that. I drink that stuff all the time. It's great for when you're really tired. It picks you up. It's great. And we were just like, but what is it? And she was like, it's bird's nest drink. Like they literally, it's the nest of a bird, and I don't know what they do to make it into a drink, but the drink, we actually tried it. We bought it and we tried it, and there were little pieces in it. So like, I don't know if they like pour water through the nest or something, but that's what they do.
Naomi.
That's insane. They do that.
Yeah.
Naomi's face was great.
It's just so interesting. And it's like, yeah, that totally fits with what he's saying. And it fits with the well-traveled aspect of him too.
Exactly. Yeah. So then that caused a conversation, which we always have whenever there's like a weird new food that we're trying, like who decided the very first time that this would be a good idea? Here's a bird's nest. I'm going to pour some water through it and drink it.
I've also heard that olives, you have to eat like 5 times to actually like enjoy olives.
Really?
Like, so if you like olives, that's great, but you have to actually have them at least 5 times in order to enjoy them, because I think they're an acquired taste. I think it's olives, that's that one.
That's interesting. I don't remember because now I love olives, but I can see like the first time you taste one, it's very different. Yeah.
Yeah. Just interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean,
I was just gonna start looking at
go ahead.
a couple of these comments. The Master of Disguise and his accents. Did anyone notice that too? Like, did either of you?
Mm-hmm.
Like how his R's or whatever, like they said he's definitely sounded different kind of English or something. It's like, that guy's good. Yeah.
He probably, and nobody can tell his nationality, which means he probably speaks all of those languages that Faria taught him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to speak them with different accents as well, like to speak French with an English accent, even though he's a native French speaker, that just is incredible.
Wild.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes. So many.
I know there are criminals that have done that in the past too.
There was I read a book about Stockholm, and when like they first did the Stockholm syndrome, like the first event, right, when like that made Stockholm syndrome a thing. And the guy who robbed the bank, he was from Stockholm, or he was from Sweden, and he spoke English because he didn't want them to know what part of Sweden he was from.
Oh.
And he only spoke in English, and he had the prisoners that are his hostages translate for him because then he would have given it away with his accent. So he purposely spoke in only English.
That's interesting.
There was one guy who struck several different places in California, and first he was known as like a ransacker, the Visalia ransacker, and then he became a rapist, and then the further south he went, he became a murderer, and I can't remember what all things he was called. Maybe the original Night Stalker. Anyways, he was also like that, where he would play games with everybody so that they couldn't figure out his identity. He would speak with different accents and stuff like that. So some people thought he was like Hispanic and, you know, all this stuff, and nobody could really guess anything about him at all. It's creepy. But they finally found him through DNA, which is amazing.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
Huh.
Sidetrack, sorry.
No, it's interesting for sure. And I think the Count would be a master at that if he was wanting to be that villainous criminal, right?
Yes.
I'm glad he had nobler intentions. If we want to call them noble intentions. Yes. The whole scene at Sinbad's island or whatever, I think is just so funny. In some ways, like, yes, it's so weird, and the way he acts about the whole thing, and everyone involved in the game of playing his servant, and everyone is just like, it's just so strange. But it's almost like, I was thinking, like, is Dante's just having fun? He's like, oh, I'm just gonna play this game on Franz, like this young guy who's coming around or just happens to be here. Like, let's just do this up and just be totally. And then as soon as
the whole time,
complete, like, just sand. There's nothing here. Like, let's hide all our props as soon as you sleep. I don't know. It's just so funny.
That's funny.
So.
The whole time, I really was like, oh, it's definitely Franz that he's targeting. Who is Franz? Why is he important? And then it was Albert. So great.
Yeah, that is so great. I was also just thinking, I liked that this section kind of like, because I was expecting, okay, like, this is where the revenge starts. We're going to find out, you know, kind of what his plan is. But I liked that it actually didn't start with revenge, where it really just started with him helping the guy who owned the boat originally before he went to jail, Morel, that he helped him, you know, like, he got so close. He was about to blow his brains out. It was so desperate, you know, and that he helped him, and that he did it without ever revealing himself to Morel. It was like completely behind the scenes. I'll help this guy out.
I knew that scene was happening, and I thought for some reason that he did commit suicide. And so I was listening to the audio, and I'm like, no, I can't listen anymore. I have to physically read this section. I can't listen to this happen. And as soon as that happened, I'm like, oh, okay, I can put back on the audiobook now. Because I was like, I just didn't want to hear it happen. No. But the Count just swoops in at the second that he needs to and saves the day, which it all just works out. But you can see that he still cares about people who cared about him and who didn't neglect him, which is another thing I thought. The Caderousse, the guy who was the drunk at the beginning, and how he told the story about how his father refused food instead of him, like, not being given food.
Right.
It's like, how truthful is that story? But at the same time, he seemed pretty truthful about what he had done. So yeah, it's interesting to think maybe he was a good friend, but he was in the wrong place with the wrong mentality, or, you know, the wrong sobriety, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. It was just a
I
thought
just
that
like, because it shows that Dante's more complicated than just, like, it's not just a man intent on revenge, that it's more complicated than that. Otherwise, he would have just ignored Morale altogether and just been, like, so single focused on his, revenge plan, which he still is, but I like that it's more complicated than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Amanda says that the count changed very suddenly. Yeah. It's a very alarming switch on the audio. It would be.
Mm-hmm.
I only switched to audio because my migraine was so bad and I could only intake it through audio, but I stopped it every time I had to tab something. So I didn't have many tabs this time, but I was like, I want to tab that thing. But
I did notice there was a couple of times with Dante where you really got that vengeance is still definitely on his mind, even though he did, help Morale, but vengeance was still definitely on his mind. And like, there were moments where I was like, this guy is actually kind of scary, like in his, his emotional intent. So here was one, it's the end of chapter 30. He says, and now, said the unknown, farewell, kindness, humanity, and gratitude. Farewell to all the feelings that expand the heart. I have been heaven's substitute to recompense the good. Now the God of vengeance yields to me his power to punish the wicked. At those words, he gave a signal, and as if only awaiting the signal, the yacht instantly put out to sea. That happens right after he made sure that Morale was okay. It was just like, okay, I did that. Now my mind is set. And I was like, ooh, like it gave me a little bit of a shiver, like, whoa, that's intense.
Yeah, I thought it was also interesting. The front scene was really interesting on the island because it revealed a lot about Sinbad or Dantes in a lot of ways. Because I made a note that he was like, I made a vow when I thought little that I should ever be able to accomplish it. And that was back in the prison. And then, so he's telling a lot of things to Franz that I don't think he realizes, or like Franz realizes the deal that he's actually telling him. And then like Franz asks, and why revenge? Or for revenge, for instance, and why revenge? Because you seem to me like a man who, persecuted by society, has a fearful account to settle with it. So Franz really sees the true part of him.
Yes.
I don't know.
And then another one of those coincidences that it's Franz that overhears the conversation in the Colosseum and recognizes again that that's Sinbad the sailor. Another coincidence,
So I just think Franz knows a lot more than he actually does realize, even though he doesn't know the backstory. So,
and that
convenient
he's the
for
one
us.
He's leery of Dante's, right? He's just like, I'm not sure. Like he tells Albert, Albert's just like, whatever, that's great, let's do anything. And Franz is like, maybe think a little bit before, because he's had these moments with Dante's and he's like, I'm not entirely sure what this guy's up to,
Yeah. He's like, the picture doesn't make sense that this guy is filling in his head. This picture's, something's missing or he's covering up something too much. And I think Albert's like, hey, let's just have fun and party. And at first I was like, oh, this guy's just like Marius from last year. Like all of the girls, he's just having fun. And then this time I'm like, actually, he does have a brain, which is nice to see. He's not just running around over anything. But at the same time, it was like, this is a little, he's naive in some ways. But I was glad to see that, like, when he was captured and he was like, fine. Like, I mean, it's not 7, so why'd you wake me up yet? Like, don't kill me. It's not 7 o'clock. It was like, okay, he's not completely an idiot, but he's also naive.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, when they're in Rome and the first day of the carnival, when the executions are supposed to happen, there was a really interesting conversation with Franz and Dante's. And Franz says, I do not quite understand you, replied Franz. Pray explain your meaning, for you excite my curiosity to the highest pitch. Listen, said the Count. and deep hatred mounted to his face as the blood would to the face of any other. If a man had by unheard of and excruciating tortures destroyed your father, your mother, your betrothed, a being who, when torn from you, left desolation, a wound that never closes in your breast, do you think the reparation that society gives you is sufficient when it interposes the knife of the guillotine between the base of the occiput and the trapezial muscles of the murderer, and allows him who caused you years of moral sufferings to escape with a few moments of physical pain? Like, it was so telling about Dante's views in that scene. You know, like, he was more than happy for that guy to get executed. And just like, so Franz is listening to this stuff and he's like, you know, this guy's got a lot of hatred there and a lot of, you know, he's a little too eager maybe for executions.
And especially after he heard the revenge bit back on the island, then he's like, and now something's going on with this guy.
Mm-hmm.
It is interesting what this is saying, like what Annika's saying, because it's like, yeah, they recognize each other, but I think the Count doesn't realize that Franz recognizes him. Because no one else recognizes him. So if the entire book so far, right? No one else has from his past, no one. And then I think for him to be like, oh, I know this kid, but this kid doesn't know me because I, you know, no one else.
I fool everybody.
I fool everyone. And then it's like, but Franz does. And then when he goes up to him and being like, no, you have a deal with this guy. I know it. I heard it. He's like, oh, this kid knows a lot.
Yeah.
So I think that's when the reveal happens to Edmond Dantes, the Count, that oh wait, Franz actually does recognize him.
It is strange to me that he invited Franz onto the island and all that stuff. Because Albert wasn't with him at the time. So like, why did he do that? Because that then puts him at risk later, that the fact that Franz knows so much about him.
Mm-hmm.
It is strange.
In some ways, it's almost like, is this too coincidental or is this planned? Like, and I don't have an answer for all this because I'm just like, I don't know the answer. It never said in the book, but I'm like, is it planned that they're going to kidnap Albert and that they need Franz to know? Or like, I don't know. It just, because that's another coincidence, right? Like,
and it makes it sound, I wonder if he actually knew that Franz and Albert were friends and that his way to get to Albert was through Franz, and maybe that's why he invited him to the island.
Yeah, that's another, like, if he knows that, then maybe he's like, oh, this is the guy who I can get in with another guy. Like,
right.
So
maybe
it's hard
so.
to say
Could
what's
be
all
long
planned
game.
and what's not.
But then he would know that Franz recognized him. And you would think he would capitalize on that. Remember, I had you to the island. You guys should come hang out with me again.
Unless he's like just trying to, I don't know. Because that's the thing, right? Like, that scene is weird. But if he knows that he can get in with, like, or save Albert from the bandits, then he'll have Albert completely indebted to him forever. And which will mean his parents will be indebted to him. And that starts the revenge of that family. And so to have that situation, it's like, okay, well, was that kidnapping planned? Even though it doesn't look like it was planned. Because the bandits were like, no, that's not okay. We didn't want to hurt your friend. So that's kind of where I'm like, what is planned? What's not?
Annika has a question, or she says here that it was Franz's idea. Annika, what was Franz's idea?
To go to the Count for the money.
Oh.
I mean, he put himself in a good spot to be the only person who gave them the money.
It might just be that the author is using Franz to help us see the whole story. And literally, that's the whole point of him being everywhere and knowing the Count for who he is. That could be like the main purpose behind Franz.
He could be our eyes. Like,
he could be our eyes, yeah.
Understanding how this guy can be in all places.
There's like a term for that Brandon Sanderson uses for writers. The Watson character. He's the Watson character who needs everything
Right.
explained, to him.
Right. Yeah. The audience surrogate. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Audience surrogate. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Annika said it was his idea. It was Franz's idea to go to the island.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I know.
So then,
although it's tempting if you're like, this is the island that only smugglers go to, and there's apparently a lore behind it. Then you're like, oh, okay, I'll just go another island. Like,
but he was waved down with fire. His ship was like, they made their appearance known to Franz so that he would go to the island in the first place.
So maybe that part wasn't planned, but through their conversation at the island, the Count realized that Franz could be helpful.
But he also never revealed his name because he only called himself Aladdin.
This is so twisty.
It's just like, because that's what I'm like, what's planned, what's not? Is like all of Rome planned? Because that's fine. I would accept that. But like, is the the island just happened to be a coincidence where Franz now knows more than he should?
Well, and how much did Franz tell the Count on the island? I can't remember now, but did Franz say anything about his friend Albert and the fact that they were going to Rome? Was that part of their conversation? Because maybe it was that moment that the Count decided to make his plans for Rome.
I don't know. They had a lot of revenge talk.
They did.
I'm trying to remember. Yeah, what did they say? They talked about how he found his Nubian servant.
Yeah, they talked about food.
Food, yeah.
Yeah.
Hashish.
Yeah. I don't know. It doesn't really go over all their conversations, but it's a strange one. I don't think he revealed himself because the guy's like, I'll call myself Sinbad. You tell me what name. And he's like, call me Aladdin. And that's kind of what they went off of.
Yes.
So hidden identities. It's funny to me to think that, like, could that be planned as part of it? Or is that just lucky happenstance that it happens to be the same
It's fun to
guy?
discuss.
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting here, I've just gone back to the beginning of that chapter, Italy, Sinbad the Sailor, and it starts with introducing these two guys, Albert and Franz, and the fact that they agreed to see the carnival at Rome, and they went and they arranged their rooms at that hotel with that guy, Pastrini.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's when the Count was like, because if the Count was already there and already had rooms at that hotel, I don't know, like how much was he planning, right?
It kind of feels like he's an all-knowing God or all-knowing character in the book, right? Like he just knows where to be at the right time to make the right connections, which is just
all that happens, and then Albert and Franz split up a bit, and that's when Franz goes to the island of Monte Cristo.
Yeah. So it's just a really interesting thing to think that the Count knows everything, right?
Yeah.
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 So Greenswig Cottage has a comment about Mercedes giving up on him too soon. Yep. It was 18 months, like he figured out. So, yeah, it kind of looked like he might harm Albert, but he was definitely like buttering him up for whatever might happen. I'm not going to say anymore. And then Rodella says it's hard to untangle what Dantes knows, what Dumas knows. Funny thing about that, when I was trying to find my Count of Monte Cristo ebook, I was looking under Dantes, not Dumas. I'm like, I don't have the ebook. I know I've got the ebook before. And then I typed it in and I'm like, oh, it's just under the other surname that I should have been looking under.
I am still getting strong, like, Red Rising vibes from this, or like that whole series. Have you guys read that? I forget.
I haven't.
Oh, so that author said one of his influences was the Count of Monte Cristo, and I'm getting such vibes. There's so many similarities.
It's very interesting how this book is kind of, I think, maybe not the original revenge tale. I don't know how many other revenge tales like this are before it, but it seems like it's one of the big ones that kind of inspired a lot of revenge.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I think you would really love that series, Naomi. Potentially.
I'll have to look it out now because I love
It's
this
so
book.
fast paced.
Yeah. And it is interesting that he knows people so well because, you know, studying them and all that for 10 years.
Oh, I bet he
Would you
was.
agree?
Yeah.
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 Like, do you think that he was disappointed when he found out that Villefort was already dead? You know, because I imagine that Villefort was a big part of his revenge plan to get back at that guy, but now he's already dead, killed by, interestingly enough, his own staff. That guy, that Petruchio guy.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's interesting for sure.
Yeah.
I think he would be definitely disappointed. So it's interesting to see where he's going to go to the next step.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I also think it's interesting that I couldn't remember who, when Franz was talking, not Franz, when Albert was talking about an engagement, I was like, who was he engaged to? Because I couldn't remember, but he's engaged to Danglars' daughter.
Oh, that's right.
So there's another connection to another villain in the book.
That is right. I completely forgot about that. But yeah, that's fascinating.
So it's going to be interesting to see how that relationship and how I don't know what he'll do with that relationship, but it'll be interesting. Nonetheless.
Also, the fact that Morel's son is now involved in the story, I wonder what his role is going to be, right? Because he was there for, I can't remember when he showed up, but
he showed up when his family was like, our dad's going to kill himself because he doesn't have the money or whatever.
Right. But I mean, later, like the 10-year, that happened before the 10-year gap, right?
Oh, did it? I can't remember if that was the 10 before the 10-year gap or not.
I can't remember either. But then he shows up again later and now I'm trying to think who was there and why he was it was something to do with Franz and Albert, or he was there when the Count goes to Albert's. Was he there when the Count goes to visit Albert in Paris?
I'm just going to check. So it's Morel's story is chapter 29. So it was right before. It was before the whole 10-year. It was before Rome, at least. So
right. Yeah. So then 10 years later, we get Morel's son back again. And I just think, like, I don't think that that's just a one-off. I think he's back because he's going to have something to do with the story.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that's interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's going to be, but I would be disappointed if he didn't have any further action in the story.
It's interesting to see the next generation. We only see a couple of the kids right now, but it's interesting because we know of at least the daughter of Danglars, and we know of an illegitimate or a son of Villefort, who at least he knows his parents aren't his parents. We don't know if he knows who his actual parent is. So we have a next generation, which I think is interesting to see too.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that's very interesting.
I like this. A conspiracy theory with names. Too many relationships.
You would need
that's why
it.
It looks so big.
Yeah.
I totally picture that.
That would be necessary.
His mind just could be like that. Where he's like, oh, I'll just do that and then. Yeah,
I can't imagine writing a book with this complicated of a plot before computers.
No kidding, notes. Right? I think Dumas had his own room like that with post-it notes, everything, and strings connecting stuff. He's like, I gotta keep my plot together.
And to think that this book was published in serialized, so people had to get one chapter at a time or whatever it was, and so they'd be like, chapter 5 was so long ago, and then chapter 30 they're like, oh wait a second, I don't remember how those two are connected.
Can you imagine reading this complicated of a book in serialized form? If it was me, I would be keeping everything, all of the previous magazines, so that I could backtrack and remind myself about stuff.
I could not keep it. I would probably just wait until they're all out and then I'd read the whole thing.
Yeah.
You'd never know when it ends because it's serialized. So you'd just be like,
And like, if it is only a chapter or two in each magazine, can you imagine, like, it would be like 2 years before you were finished that story?
yeah. It's interesting. I think it's a very interesting fact about this one.
Yes.
Yeah,
Amanda
definitely.
says, the next generation has no idea what's coming. I think they have no idea who's on their tail. No one does, because Dantes, when he left, was sweet and innocent, and that was it. So
Mercedes is the only one who seems to harbor any concerns about the future. She's like,
are you sure he's a good guy, Albert? He's like,
Yeah.
yeah, he saved me from bandits. Don't worry.
I can't wait till we go back to Mercedes. I'd like to find out more what she's thinking, yeah.
And if she does truly recognize him and realize that it is in fact Edmond Dantes, she's gonna be like, I was so stupid to go for Ferdinand.
Yeah. Because maybe, I mean, I got the impression that she recognized his voice, but she also firmly believes that he's dead. So it would have just been like, she was probably just very confused. Like, that sounds like someone I used to love, but he's dead. And, so maybe she's not convinced that it's him, but I think that there's definite doubts now in her mind.
Do you think that she recognizes him because she heard his voice before looking at him?
Mm-hmm.
I think his appearance just throws everyone off. So maybe that's why she clued into it.
Yeah, I think so. Because, she heard his voice first before she saw him.
And I'm trying to keep track of the age. So now he's 45. Like, they're all in that age range.
Right.
Because he was 34 before. So he's like 44 now. Just trying to keep on top of the ages.
It is so hard for me to picture him as 44. I still picture him as the 19-year-old who went to jail. But he's been harboring these revenge fantasies for quite a while now.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, he's been out of jail for 20 years. To not act on it for so long?
Because he's now been out of jail longer than he was in jail.
Yeah. So to not act on them and just be sitting on that stewing in his mind, it's that's insane. All right, I'm not going to answer this because I know the answer. What do you guys think? Do you think Mercedes will leave her husband for Dantes?
Wow, that would be very scandalous.
It would.
I don't know if I've ever seen that happen in a novel that didn't end tragically for classics.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a very interesting question. I don't know.
I'm going to guess her husband is not going to be alive by the end.
Yeah.
So she ends up with Dantes, that will be why.
Yeah.
So in 18 parts. Somebody says it was published in 18 parts.
Yeah, 18 parts and 1 part a month. Oh, that'd be a year and a half. You're reading that thing.
But even so that's a good chunk each month then.
Yeah.
If it's 18 parts, you're getting a good chunk of the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Kelly thinks that she won't because she's been a different person than who she loved.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And the question too is, would Dantes want her now? Because she didn't wait for him, and who knows what he's thinking, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And then she would, but now maybe a sort of revenge.
And right, because how much room is there left in Dante's heart for love when it's still full of revenge, right?
Yeah. That's a hard battle, right? Because you're holding on to the hurt and the anger. So then is there really any room for love and forgiveness there? So
exactly. Oh, can we talk about this mysterious woman that like was in his box in Rome, and then we meet her again right at the very end of the last chapter that we read. Who is she?
I don't want to say. I know too much.
I'm so curious.
A big role.
I'm so curious. I've had all these thoughts. I was like, what if Bertuccio's sister didn't die and it's his sister and he's protecting her, but she's all damaged from the fire and that's why she's wearing veils? Although I couldn't remember if she was wearing veils at the theater in Rome.
I don't remember.
But then I'm like, who? Like, she's got to be someone that we know, right? I don't know. I'm thinking it's got to be someone that we know. Otherwise, why talk about her?
You have some good theories. This must come from reading mystery novels.
It totally is. It's totally I'm a mystery person, so now I'm all about, ooh, they wouldn't put this in if it wasn't important, and so now who is this woman? I'm trying to think like who else? Naomi is trying not to give anything away, but I'm like, who else could it be? So now I'm trying to think back, like who are some women that we've met? Who could it be? Yeah. I don't know.
You'll have to find out when you start reading the next section.
Ooh, the next section, eh?
Has the next section changed at all, or are we just starting with chapter 47 instead of 46?
I figured it out in my book because I looked in the normal books, which apparently everything else is 117 chapters except for this edition, and maybe other editions too. I don't know. Maybe more people want Rogue. What I have gone to now is I have changed the description in this video, like the live stream, and I've also changed my announcement video to have the end of like the chapter that will be named for our final chapter of each section. So everyone knows the final chapter name in those sections. We can tell, so the final chapter that we'll be reading for the next one will not be the inquiry. It'll be the summer ball.
Okay.
So we're ending on the chapter called the Summer Ball. That way, like my chapter, it's chapter 69, but that should be 68 in most versions because this book's ahead by one. So I've just put now in all of those the chapter names for the next couple sections. So
okay.
For the final chapter, we'll be reading. I figured that'd be easier, but. I mean, I don't know if you guys both have like 117 or 118 chapters in your books, but apparently this version has an extra chapter.
I think is 117. Yeah, mine's 117.
This version added a chapter with the with telling the story of Vampa. It separated the chapter with the bandits and made it two chapters into like one about Vampa, one about the bandits, and that was
I think mine did that too.
Okay.
Because my audiobook and my ebook were matching until like that point in time, I think.
I only noticed it because I was listening to my audiobook. Otherwise, I would have been completely wrong. And we wouldn't be talking about, where Caruso killed his wife and the guest with the diamond, even though we didn't really talk about that. We did a little.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's the big chapter that we would have been kind of confused
So my
about.
ebook has 117, which makes me think my audiobook probably has 118.
Okay, so we end.
And so you said this next section's ending with the chapter called A Summer Ball?
Yes, we will finish at the end of A Summer Ball and before the chapter called An Inquiry.
Right, okay, so that's still the same then because that was 68, so, okay.
Yeah.
So tell us what else you're tabbing. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
So I was just going to say, so if anyone else has a different version that has like 118 chapters or 120, whatever your version says, those are the chapter names that we're ending on. Tabbing wise, I was just mostly tabbing whenever Edmund's like, oh, and his like hands are dead or something.
Undead Edmund, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And then I tabbed when Albert's like, why is he so distinguished and all that? I don't remember why. Let me just figure that out. If anyone else has something else.
I normally tab all of my books to oblivion, but I have no tabs for this book. Like, except I had a few in the beginning for pretty moments or something, but for the most part, it's just plot, and I don't tab a lot for plot, I think.
I tabbed that the Count has a sphinx-like smile. Another mythological creature.
Right.
Yes. I do think it's interesting how the whole bandit thing happened. Like, I know we got a lot of backstory about the leader of the bandits, and then we got Vampa, and then we got, and that kind of is like a drag. But I do think that that's interesting to like kind of, if only had been like more in like, you need to know this before you read it, kind of.
Yeah, because I got into this part, I'm like, what? Am I reading a different book all of a sudden? Yeah.
That was the point when I switched from reading physically to listening on my audiobook. I was like, I'm not going to finish this if I have to read all this physically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was that was interesting though, I think, to see how the bandits have like this kind of loyalty amongst themselves. And then also how they were like, yeah, we're going to do whatever the Count says now. Like, he's boss.
It is interesting because it shows some law-abiding people, and then bandits, and then the Count of Monte Cristo, like somewhere in between. And then we have all these different people with different moralities.
Mm-hmm.
It is interesting because it sets you up to really think about the morality of the Count's decisions and kind of compare it. And I'm sure Mercedes is not going to be happy with him for taking all this revenge that I suspect is coming because we haven't really seen it yet. But
it's also interesting because you have the villains, right? Like the quote unquote villains, who are the four guys in the beginning. And then you also have these bandits. And then you have the younger generation who haven't done anything wrong themselves. And then you have the Count, who was good at the beginning and now is going down that path where he's morally gray now. And it's like all of these bad people, and you're supposed to
becoming the Godfather.
To who?
Yeah.
So it's a book full of morally gray characters.
I find it fascinating whenever I read a book where the main character is morally gray, because you're supposed to identify with the main character, you know, and like the main character, but I'm like, okay, but I don't know if I like these decisions. Like, it just makes it uncomfortable for the reader. Yeah.
And I think also because the Count is someone who we're feeling empathy for because he was thrown in prison unjustly and all these things. And now you're like, but now he's starting to do these things and we might be not approving of them. It's like, what happens? How are we supposed to feel about those decisions now? Because we felt sorry for him and we were agreeing with him, and now we don't. Or now we shouldn't in some ways.
Yeah.
Yes.
I also
it
found
does make you
fascinating.
Uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That happens too in Red Rising. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, does it?
Yeah.
I found it so fascinating that the three kind of big that were involved in Dante's going to prison. So Villefort, Danglars, and Ferdinand or whatever. That they ended up rising so high, you know, like they're high in society. They've got lots of money now. And I just thought that was so interesting because I think Dumas, you know, raised them so high because they are going to be, they're going to find themselves being lowered. You know what I mean? Like, and if they weren't raised so high, then that wouldn't be so dramatic.
I thought it was also interesting how Dante's found out the information about the other villains. Like how he used that gem to get that information. But he was also like, I'm going to split this 4 ways. So like, yay. And then the guy's like, no, don't. I'll tell you all the bad stuff. I'll tell you everything that happened. And so Dante's found out the true information instead of just being like, well, Ferdinand was kind of a good guy. I mean, he did marry Mercedes. I was like, no, like, let me tell you all of the details.
Yeah.
So he was able to get it all out by basically corrosion or whatever you want to call it. But then, of course, we later see that Carus is not a good guy either because he let his wife trick him, which I also didn't really appreciate how his wife was portrayed. But she was a minor character, so I was like, okay. But I mean, like, he wasn't exactly morally standing. He was very, I don't know, like a push around, maybe you'd call him. Like he lets whoever's around him decide his moral decisions. I'd maybe call it.
That whole scene where Catamoose, whatever his name is, kills the jeweler guy and his wife, apparently, I was a little bit confused about what happened there because there was some remark that it was his wife who initially had the plan to kill the jeweler.
Yeah.
So then what happened? Why did Catamoose kill his wife?
I think she stabbed the guy and then he shot his wife.
The jeweler shot the wife.
And a knife as well? Wasn't there both? I might.
That's right, because I remember being confused about the knife. Oh, okay, so she knifed the jeweler, but he wasn't dead yet, so he got a shot off and he shot the wife? Is that what you're saying?
I'm thinking Cataroos killed his wife, and then he ran away with the money and the jewel, and then the poor guy who was stuck underneath the house got caught.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know. It's unclear.
But he was covered in blood at least because but he was also the one who was like he just heard what happened upstairs. He didn't see it. He wasn't in the room, right?
Right, which is why we don't get all the information.
Anyone, and the jeweler was still alive when he left, like when he went upstairs. And he couldn't.
Which is what made me wonder if it was the jeweler that shot the wife.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, and because we only get what the guy hears, we don't know all the information.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe Catamouche didn't kill anybody, but he realized everybody's dead. I'll just leave with all the money. I don't know.
Either way, he didn't dissuade his wife from like killing him, and he also was like, "Okay, fine, you can sleep in our room," and like he let it happen. So he's in the very least an accessory to the murder.
Totally.
Just like an accessory to putting a man in jail for like false reasons, right? Like he doesn't stop anyone when they're wanting to do something that's not good.
That's right. Like he doesn't actively engage in stuff, but he kind of just passively lets things happen. He never stops anything from happening.
He is not a force for good in the world.
Yeah, it's true. He lets whoever's around him decide what he's going to do. Yeah. Amanda says the Count's morally gray compass guides defense.
Yes.
It's hard, yeah. And the diamond, the same one he gave to Morel. I don't know, because if Cataroos got caught with the diamond, then they would have taken the diamond into custody, wouldn't they?
Yeah, and that part with giving Julie's dowry, didn't that happen before?
I thought it did, because all those things were like 20, or well, he talked to Cataroos in like 26 or whatever, 27, just to be left off, and then he went and talked to Morel, and then he gave him the money.
Oh yeah, so it's not. I would say it's probably not.
It's probably a different
diamond.
gem.
Yeah, he had plenty.
We didn't need to have the same one to pass around. It's very interesting to look at these different characters.
Yeah. Pamela, our Greenstick Cottage, was saying that he could have taken care of Cataroos during those missing years. Now, what do you mean by that? Taking care of as like he took care of Morel, or taking care of as in killing him? Because Cataroos wasn't as good. Like Morel deserved, in my mind, he deserved the help that Dante's gave him, the Count gave him. Cataroos, I don't think he did, because he wasn't actively involved, but he was passively involved. He never stopped anything. So I don't think Dante's would have bothered to help him out very much.
It's kind of like everyone's getting their just desserts. She says, sinisterly taken care of. He could have arranged a hit on Cataroos during that time. Who knows?
Maybe, but I think he needed Cataroos for information.
Yeah. But then he does manage to like take the guy who manages to know everything about Cataroos and like take him under his wing. So that's helpful, right? But I do think it's interesting how everyone gets their just desserts. Like Morel gets his just desserts in a sense that like he gets what he's deserving of. And then Cataroos, who, even though he wasn't a main planner of the like whole sending him to prison, he gets what he deserves by going along with a murder plot. Just as he went along with the plot to send him to prison, right? Like,
yeah.
So he's just basically letting them all maybe get what they deserve by their own actions, or doling out the equal deserving judgment, whatever that might be.
Right. Well,
He thinks
what
he can do a
thinks
better
they
job
deserve.
than God.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's put himself in that position of deciding what they deserve, and that's not human.
That's not good. Yeah.
But he has.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting.
It is. That's probably the most exciting thing for me, is kind of navigating the morality of this situation.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard because if he was only the bad guy, right? Like, I think if he was only bad to the villains and he was only a bad person, you'd be like, oh, don't like the Count at all. But then he's good to morale. I'm like, oh, that's where the rub comes in for me. Like, if he was bad to if he didn't care about morale, I'd be like, okay, he's just a bad guy now. But he does care.
Yeah.
And that's where my rub comes in.
It is tricky because, like we were saying earlier, everybody has different ideas of morality, because even the bandits, who we would say are, they're criminals and whatever, but within their own circle, they have their own level of morality.
Yeah.
Their own
and
idea
they have
of
their loyalty
morality.
levels where they're like, we're definitely not going to do this, but we will at 7:00. Like, we would never dare to hurt you at like 6:55, but we will at 7:00 because we said we would.
Because we said we would, yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting. And then this one, I think it's interesting that the Count asks his story, and I think it's actually because he wants to know where the secret passageway is out of the house.
Oh, well, and I wonder, I think the Count obviously knew a lot of Portuccio's story, but not all of it. Because he would have only known whatever Portuccio confessed to the father, well, who was the Count, and he didn't know it. But he didn't tell him that whole part about the baby, right? In his initial confession?
I would say probably not. He probably just told him the murder.
I can't remember now what he told him, but and is it another coincidence that the Count bought that house, or did he want that house?
I think he wanted that house.
Okay, yeah, that makes more sense.
He said that, like, he's like, oh no, I asked you to buy this house, and then Bertuccio or whatever his name was like, no, I didn't buy it. And he's like, oh, I must have seen it in the paper or something. It's like, I didn't want this house, because he has like the horrible memory of murdering someone there. So he actively tried not to buy that house, but the Count wanted it.
I wonder why. Like, does he want to prove to himself that Villefort's dead? Like, is he gonna like confirm that he's buried in the backyard? Like, why does he want this house?
I don't know. We do know it has a secret like passageway out of the house because of that little tunnel into the garden, right? Yeah.
And we also don't know what happened to Villefort's mistress. What do we say? Who is she? We don't know what happened to her.
Mm-hmm. It's true. Yeah. Amanda says they're all reaping what they've sown, and the Count is the reaper.
Oh,
there you go.
My gosh.
Undead thing.
In Red Rising, the character is known as the Reaper.
That's not helpful for your alliterations with this. I think this interesting last line, which is what makes me think that he wants the house for the tunnel, was that it says, at another hour, every light in the house is extinguished, and it might have been thought that all of its inmates slept.
Yeah.
And it might have been thought. Like,
which means they are.
Who's not sleeping? I would bet the Count.
Exactly.
So what's he doing while he's not sleeping, right? Is he like leaving without anyone knowing him leaving? So it's interesting.
Yes, it is helpful to have a secret passage. I wish I had a secret passage in my house. I wish there was like the panel by the fireplace when you press it and the fireplace spins around, I want one of those.
Yes.
It'd be handy. I'd love like a secret elevator because yesterday they were using the elevator for like moving furniture and I had to carry all the groceries up 4 floors. I'm like, no.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I would have loved a secret elevator at that point. Yeah. Does anyone else in the who's watching have anything to ask or talk about? Or you two, Christy and Janelle? I think I don't have anything else to add for this section, but we've had a lot.
I think I'm good. I mentioned all my tabs, so.
I looked back to see if I had tabs, and actually I did have a few, but nothing worth really talking about. It was like I highlighted some of the speeches that were like, oh, heartrending,
Yeah.
Like when the father was going to die and he and his son were speaking and stuff. I was like, oh, my heart.
Very sad.
Yes.
Yeah.
Here's one. A good revenge story. I love a good revenge story with English satisfaction. We see evil triumph over too much in our own world. So it's nice to see bad people get their just desserts.
Yeah. I think that is why people like revenge stories, right?
True.
Yeah.
It's funny. I was reading the Book of the City of the Ladies, which is like a 14th century classic or a 15th century classic. Whatever. It's old. And it used the phrase just desserts. And I was like, is this a real phrase that they would have used? Or is this just the translator putting it in? So I looked it up. And it actually is a phrase that comes back from like 1300, 1200.
Really?
France, where it's a phrase that actually means when people would get their just desserts after dinner. So if you like, or whatever, it's like an actual meaning phrasing that's like, it's that old. So
that's interesting. I would have thought the same thing, that it was too modern of a phrase to see in that book. That's interesting.
That's one of my favorite things when I read old books. I'm like, wait a second, is that actually applicable?
Yeah.
So if you had French phrase.
If I had been forced to give an answer, I would have been like Shakespeare. Maybe.
Older.
He comes up with all of that stuff.
Yes, he did come up with many, many phrases. So it's just fun. Well, I think we're good for this section. So yes, we'll be finishing off on chapter 68. So reading to the end of chapter 68. Or if you have a section that's about a summer ball, read that section, because we're going to finish after that section.
All right. The summer ball.
Apparently sections can be a little longer.
And hopefully Victoria will be back next time.
Yes.
Yeah.
She's traveling this weekend in a way, so she couldn't make it. But by this point, we'll have been at the end of this 64%, 65% of the way through. So,
wow.
Yes.
It's good.
It's going fast.
I'm loving it. So I'm loving this read along. It's great.
Yeah. Discussing it makes it so worthwhile.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to get into the action now that we're in the town with everybody who he knows and he's not leaving.
Nice.
So it'll be good. Well, we will sign off then. Thank you so much for everyone for watching, and we will see you in 2 weeks with the next section.
Can't wait.